In this module, we talk visual effects. You're at the TheIndieLot, and this is the Filmmakers Bootcamp. In this module, we're talking about compositing and CGI. And to do so, we are going to go back to reviewing a short film I introduced you to earlier in this course when we were talking about coverage, and that is the film Just Because I Can, the one with my niece, where she's sitting at the table and she is playing her game. And we talked about these caps, and just to ignore them on the table, I'm going to explain to you now why these caps are here. What we're going to do, notice over here, let me actually grab this image output here. I'm going to plug it into the viewer input so you can see here. This paper cup, we're going to take this cup, and what we want to do is we want to composite it into this shot where my niece is sitting at the table. So let me bring that one back up. Okay, so we want to composite it into this shot here. And so this lens cap sitting here, it's here for two reasons. One is to lock down a location as to where I'm going to set the cup once I finally get it composited in. And number two, if I just move down here to this timeline and I find a frame of the video clip where she's actually looking at it, so this cap is also here so that she actually has something visually, physical visually to look at, so that when I do composite the cup in, she's looking in the right location, and it looks as if as long as I do the compositing correctly and succeed at that, it should look like the cup was always there in the scene to start with. Now you may ask the question, well, if you're going to just put a cup on the table, why don't you just put it in there and shoot your scene? Well, here's what's going to happen. Let me give you a little more of the story. She's going to use the force, so to speak, to crush this cup. All right, and when she crushes the cup, then she's going to go back to her game plane. So I can't really do that effect right here within this shot, and so I have to pull it aside separately as a separate shot, do it separately and composite it back in. And so that's why it's not here in the original shot. All right, but that's what we're going for. Let me go ahead and bring up this. After we shot our initial, here we go. So after we shot our initial scenes with my niece, I went ahead and took care of shooting the different states of the crushing of the cup. So here's state one, where the cup is in its full uncrushed state. Then I crushed it a little bit, reshot that. So this is state two. Coming up here will be state number three. Did a little more crushing on it. And so you can see in the original first shot, I lined up my cup onto those caps that were on the table, and then each new cup crush, I was trying to make sure that I kept the cup in the same position, and it moved a little bit, but still, it still turned out fairly decent. These are the various states of the cup crush that we went through. All right, we're almost done here. I think there's one more. No, one more after this, so I can go ahead and speed this up a little bit. All right, there it is. That's the last state. So starting from a whole cup that's undamaged to this final position here, I'm calling them 6 cup states, okay, or crush states. What you're going to see when I finally get to showing you the actual composite of this crushing is you're going to see that when she squeezes in a long drawn out method, but the cup crush happens like really quickly, and so it doesn't look quite right. So a couple ways we could have fixed that is I could have reshot the scene with my niece where she crushes and had her just squeeze her hand much faster so that it syncs up with the crushing state of the cup. So, but you will notice that once I get to showing you the final composited version of that. Okay. So those are the cup states, and so what we're trying to do is we're going to, in this compositing screen here in Blender, and this is called node-based compositing. A couple different packages I use of software use node-based compositing, very powerful way to work. So we want to composite this cup over top of this right here. And let me go ahead and plug this back in. Now I want to show you something here. This alpha over node is a very interesting node. It's used to merge two layers together, where one layer, the top layer, would have some transparency in the image so that you can see through to the bottom layer. Now, something you would have to get used to once you start working in Blender is we've got a couple image inputs here for this alpha over node. All right, the top one really represents the bottom layer, and the bottom input represents the top layer. So whatever, okay, so for example, if I grab this of my niece, the original footage, and I pop it in there, I've just popped it into the bottom layer. If I move it here, I've popped it into the top layer. Now you may be wondering, well, why do I see it in the top layer, but I don't see it in the bottom layer? And that's because now in the bottom layer, my top layer is being filled with this color white. So, and to show that to you, prove it to you, I can go here, I can change that color to black, and you can see this is my top layer, and it's obstructing my view down to the bottom layer. Now this factor control here, think of this as a way to control the opacity of the top layer. So it goes from 0 to 1, so it's at 1 right now, which is its full strength. If I drag this to the left, you can see I am reducing the opacity, making that layer more and more transparent so I can see what's below. So there it is at 0%. Here it is at roughly 50% of opacity, okay? At around 750-ish, okay, it's 75% opacity, and then that's what it looks like at full opacity, right? So completely obstructs the lower layer that's below it. So if I go ahead now and I drag in the cup that we want to composite over top of the original footage, you can see now the cup fills the top layer, and no longer do we have that black color because we're not defining the top layer by that color, we're defining it by this video clip, which could also be an image, video clip, whatever. It's now in the top layer. So using this factor now, I want to start dialing down the opacity of the top layer so I can in effect mix these two layers together into one shot. All right, but you'll see, look what's happening as I drag this down, okay? While it is changing the transparency of my top layer, this control here affects the entire layer. There's no way for me with this control to isolate and say to Blender, you know what, I want to keep the cup, this area right here, fully opaque, and I only want to make this part of the image transparent. So using this factor, I can't specify or isolate the various pieces of this image and get the opacity or transparency that I'm looking for. So I got to have a different solution, something that I can use as my factor value that's going to give me what I need. And what am I trying to do? I'm trying to get this cup to be completely visible, but the background layer to also be completely visible, with the exception of top layer. So right here, this portion here, I want to come from the top layer, and the rest of this image, I want it to come from the bottom layer. So hopefully that makes sense. So how do I do this? So let me jump to a different screen. I'm going to go to the motion tracking screen. Again, another very powerful feature within Blender for motion tracking. And in this case, I have this screen set up in mask mode. So if you look right here, I can either be in mask mode or tracking mode. I am in mask mode. And I've created a layer here called Cup 1, of which I've used my mouse to draw a bounding layer around the cup. This white line here represents the hard edge of the mask. This green line represents a level of feathering. So the farther I pull out this green line from around the white line, the greater level of feathering I get. Let me switch. I'm going to go here to mask 0.001, and you can see here I already have a mask created. Let me go ahead and just delete that and recreate it for you. Holding down the computer control key and using my left mouse button, I'm going to start just clicking. Now, usually you'll be tracing over some object, not just randomly clicking like that. Alt-C will close that. But what I've just defined on this mask 0.001 layer, is I've defined a mask made of these points. This is the hard line of the mask, and I'm going to double click on A to, well, one click of A to deselect, another click of A to reselect all those points. Using Alt S, I'm going to go ahead, scale, and drag my mouse to pull out this feather. Okay, and so basically that's how you do it. So what I'm saying is, from this point to here, let's feather out the mask. Okay, and we'll talk here in a moment as to why you want a feather. But let me go ahead and switch back to cup 1. All right, this is a video clip of that first state of the cup in its completed position or whole position. Okay, and basically what I did is, with each one of those 6 states, I pulled those movies into here and used this masking object to create the mask for me, and then I'll show you how I composited it all together then for the final output. All right, but I've got my mask created, so let's jump over here back to the compositing screen. Okay, so now what I want to try to do is I want to try to use that mask and apply it instead as the factor. So how do I do that? I'm going to hit Shift A to bring up my add tool for adding nodes, and I'm going to go here to an input, and I'm going to choose mask. So I'm going to bring that over here, and in this drop down I just want to go ahead and choose the mask that I created called Cup 1, and there it is. You can see feathering is turned on because it detected that I created a feather around that original mask, and so it's automatically selected. Now, before I start plugging all this together, I want to drag this into the viewer so we can just see what this mask is creating. And when you're working with masks, the important thing to realize is this mask, you're not going to see it in the image, but it's going to be used to calculate how parts of the image are revealed or hidden. Okay, so it's going to be used behind the scenes to hide and show things. Any part of the mask that covers your image that's 100% black, those are going to be your transparent parts of that layer. Anything that's where the white is over that image, that is going to define what's to be displayed. Okay, now watch this. I'm going to add another node here, invert. I'm going to drag that over that noodle there coming out of the mask output, and that just simply inverts the mask. So if I was to use this mask, you see, any part of my masked layer that appears where the white is going to be displayed, and any part of that layer that this mask affects that shows up where the black is going to be transparent. You won't be able to see it. So here's the idea. Can we use this mask to apply it to the top layer of our cup, all right, and in effect only show this cup in this position here, and then use the rest of this mask to show the bottom layer? And of course we can do that. So let me go ahead and plug this back in like so. All right, now I'm going to go ahead for the moment, and I'm going to leave the inverted mask in, and I'm going to drag the noodle from the output of our inverted mask into the factor. Now remember before, when we used this entire factor control, it affected the entire image. We're using a mask now because that way we can isolate that top image, all right, the top layer. This factor is applying to whatever image is plugged into the top, all right? So I'm going to throw that factor in there. All right, so look what's happening. And let me just remind you by doing this. Anything of my top layer that the mask is white is going to display through. Anything in that top layer that's behind where the black would be, that's going to be transparent, okay? And that's exactly what we get here. This is our top movie right here. This is our cup movie. All this stuff here is in the white. Here you can see my niece over here on the side. Let me just do that, and you see her a little more there. This is the state, the cup state number 1 that I filmed. Okay, so this is not our original footage, but what I did after the original footage. Okay, it's in. You can see here it comes out of here, and it runs into the top image input here. So our factor is applying to the top image, okay, or the top movie clip. And this is the transparent part of the top image, which now is allowing us to see through the top image down to what's the bottom layer where the original footage sits. And that's why we see these set of caps here. All right, so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to now redo our mask without the invert. Okay, I'll go ahead and I don't need this anymore. I'm going to delete the invert node. And just to remind you of what this mask does, so anything that's defined within the mask where it's completely black is going to be transparent, and any part of the affected layer that's white or gray. So you can see here we've got full on white, and it gradually decreases to black, okay, with this gray, and that's because of the feathering that we created in that mask, okay. So, but anything in this white and gray is going to be displayed, and so now when we apply this mask then to that top image, which is the cup image, this one here, now look, this is all the area right here that was defined by the white part of the mask, and as a result it shows through on from the top layer. The rest of this image, the mask was black, okay, so this part of the image gets transparent, thus revealing what's behind it in the bottom layer, which is coming from this bottom layer original footage. I hope that makes sense and that you can see what's going on here. After you get this all set up and configured, you get your nodes assembled and strung together through these noodles. All right, we go into our alpha over. This viewer node here is only for showing me what I'm working on at the moment. The composite node is what will be used when I finally go to rendering, and this composite node will take all the node inputs and outputs and do the final composite once I run that. And that would be just simply coming over here, and usually if it's a movie clip you're going to hit animate, and you can specify where to store your file, what kind of file format to use. Could be movie files, image files, etc. But basically what you do is you build your composite and then you go ahead and you export. All right, one other thing I want to point out. Now, put your attention right here around the cup. Look, you're going to probably have to lean in close to be able to see what I'm going to show you, because it's kind of hard to see. So go ahead and take this opportunity, lean in close. What I'm going to do, I'm going to come over here to this mask layer, and I'm going to uncheck feather. So here I go. So I unchecked feather, and hopefully you can see this. Do you see how the mask has changed? It's turned into a hard line, and this hard line is, if I go back over here to my motion tracking, this white line that surrounds our cup and the shadow and all that stuff, this is the hard line. Okay, the green line represents the feathered line, and that's what we're seeing here. That's what we're seeing here, this hard line, because I've turned feathering off. All right, so this is why you want to know to use feathering. If I turn feathering on, what it does is it expands the line out now to where that green line was in the mask, but it's softening the edge and making it less noticeable. Okay, and you can see some differentiation here, and the reason being is, okay, the light source that's lighting this scene is simply a window that you can't see in frame, and so the light's coming in from outside. So we probably took an hour to hour 15, hour and a half to shoot the original footage with my niece. And then, remember I told you after that was all done, then I shot the 6 states of this cup. Well, by the time we got an hour and a half into this, that light has changed because the sun is constantly moving across the sky. And so that's why we do have a slight variation here in color. It is because of the light variation changing. Now, I don't want to get too much into this, but what I'll do, I'll just real quickly show you something here. So one of the things, depending on, perhaps that light variation was much stronger than it is now. I mean, to me, what I see there is livable. You wouldn't even really know it was there except that I pointed it out to you, or that you just happen to be looking really closely. Okay? But this is what color correction in a lot of your post-processing is all about. It's about trying to match things up that don't quite match. I'm going to drag this RGB curves into the movie clip noodle that this cup is coming from. All right? And so watch what happens when you can see how as I move this around, it changes, right? the brightness, and that's because I'm on the cyan or setting here, and it basically affects the luminance, if you will. So I'm going to put that point right there back in the middle, and I'm going to come here instead and create another point, and I'm going to adjust from here and in the highlights, and I'm just going to push that ever so slightly that direction. All right, it's a very subtle difference. Let me move this over so you can see. I'm going to mute the node. You see how there it's brighter, there it's a little darker. So you can play with this, and actually right there is actually pretty decent. So I was able to kind of darken that up just a little bit and kind of match it better with the behind footage, the original footage of my niece. But that's how you would do editing and compositing of your clip, is just little things like that, where you got two clips and they're not quite lit the same way, and you got to try to match them together. And it's just a situation where you match things by eye. Okay, hopefully that gives you a good understanding of some of the post-processing tasks that you might have to do. And then in this case, we're talking about special effects and compositing. You're especially going to have to know how to color correct and adjust luminance and things like that, such as throwing in something like this, an RGB curve, to change the luminance or lightness, darkness of this object there that we've composited. I want to show you the rendered version of all the composites I did with the 6 different cup states. Keep in mind that I mentioned earlier there's already a problem. I thought when we were doing this that I would be able to get more crush states of that cup, more than 6, and I was only able to get 6. And so as a result, my cup crushes really fast, and she's still squeezing and pulling, and so it doesn't quite sync up. And it's a big enough thing that it bothers me when I look at it. But because I don't have the option to go back and reshoot her, so if it was something I could catch early on, I could go back and reshoot her and have her just squeeze faster. Okay, and this also leads to a point that I've said before, but I want to highlight again why it's so important that you work on making films, because you learn by doing. And you know what? This was my first attempt at trying to do an effect like this, and so I did one take of it, and through doing that one take, I found out where it failed and how I could have made it succeed. And so now I could go back and reshoot and do it all over again. But the more you do it, the more you learn. I think in this situation here, probably the next time I work on this effect, I'll try to pick an object such as a soda can, an empty soda can that I could crush, where I could create more crush states, and the soda can would hold its shape, whereas this paper cup did not hold the shape. And so, lesson learned. But that's why it's so important to be doing these things yourself, and not try to, on the day of your shoot, do something that you've not practiced before and are sure you can make it work. So anyways, I realize sometimes that happens and you're just shooting from the hip, and you just got to go with it. But I just wanted to pre-warn you that this is an issue in this particular film that bothers me. However, with that being said, all right, you find yourself in post, you find the weakness, the problem, not enough crush states. You're going to hear this term a lot, fix it in post. Oh, I can just fix it in post. Some things you may be able to, but other things you can't. So keep this in mind as you're developing as a new filmmaker, is try to do as much of everything you can, do it right while you're filming, okay? So that means you're going to have to practice ahead of time so you can know where the potential weaknesses are, so that by the time you get to your final day of film and you're filming for real, that you've worked out some of the issues and you have a better approach to how you're going to film this. But there are moments where you get into post and you find out you missed something, or something didn't quite work out as you thought, and now you've got to fix it in post. As we go out of this module, I want to go ahead and show you the composited version, and that will be this one right here, and I'll see you in the next module.